bad.
What's up? Another episode of Robo Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Varandas, also known as Ricky Varandas. And thank you so much for joining me for the first episode of 2019. We had an amazing 2018. Listenership went up, subscriptions went up, had so much amazing feedback from guests and listeners alike, just telling me how much they appreciate the show, that they love what I'm doing and all that stuff. And that really means a lot because sometimes when we're procrastinating, we all do it. You need that little motivation to kind of remind you why you do this and why it's important, and that people are listening and appreciating what your work that you're putting in. And when you get that, it gives you, like I said, a little bit of extra motivation. And we had a great 2018. I'm hoping to have a equally good or greater 2019. I'm hoping that my curiosity brings me to more amazing guests and more amazing topics. And last year was awesome year. We seem to have a lot of popularity in the roundtable discussion episodes. The JFK assassination show did really well, part 1 and part 2. If you haven't checked those out, please do. Also, the Swapcast I did with James Corbett, Tinfoil Hat with Sam Tripoli, and the Conspiracy Farm guys, Pat Miletich and Jeffrey Wilson, did really well. And in 2017, one of my top downloaded episodes was with Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, leading expert in the ketogenic diet. And this year, making number 9 of my top 10 most downloaded episodes is another ketogenic episode, which is the one I did with Dr. Thomas Seyfried. That's episode 159, Keto and Cancer, Manage and Prevent Disease. And we really go into how the ketogenic diet and similar therapies can really help with fighting things like arthritis, diabetes, cancer. And Dr. Seyfried has 150 peer-reviewed studies, and it's really interesting. You're probably wondering, why am I talking about this? It's a topic that I'm really passionate about. That's why I was also not recently, but in December, I was on the Tinfoil Hat podcast. I don't know the exact date, but if you look up Big Pharma episode, I believe it was 149. That's the one that I was on, and we talked a lot about diet, nutrition, vitamins, and modern medicine, and all that stuff, and all the corruption when you follow the money that you find. So check those shows out. Anytime I do a show on diet, health, nutrition, it's a topic that I'm really passionate about, because if I can give somebody some type of information that can directly help their energy levels, their cognitive ability, their joint pain, whatever it may be, or at least just, like I always say, don't take my word for it, research it and lead you in the right direction. And you do some of your own research and find some stuff that can really help. If it's like I said, if it's about medicine, health, whatever. I've done a show on kratom, which I think can help a lot of people if you're dealing with chronic pain or dealing with some opiate addiction. Then it can definitely help. So definitely look up that episode too. I did with Chris Bell, another great show and great episode I did. So what else? Also, remember to subscribe to us on YouTube. RV36 is the name of the channel. I know my videos are on a bunch of different channels, which I'm completely okay with. But if you're looking for my specific channel, the one that I run and initially put all the shows on, it's RV36, or you can just search the Ripple Effect Podcast and you'll find it. And if anybody calls in using video, like Charlie, my guest, did today, you'll be able to see the guest and I actually have the conversation. So if you want to put some faces to the voices, that's how you do it. And also in the show description, I always put links to all our guests' work, their social media sites, all that stuff. And also you can find links to our Patreon page, which if you want to support the show, please, that's a great way of doing it. Please support the show. You can join one of 4 Patreons. I wish that was a joke, but that's probably what it's at. I haven't checked it recently, but that's probably in single digits. If everybody who downloaded the show donated $1, I could do this full time. So that's why I keep continuously saying, hey, just support the show, please, if you can. If I could do this full time, the effort and energy that I could spend on this and not elsewhere would really help improve the show and how many shows I put out and all that stuff. So that's the goal. But obviously that's, I think, every podcaster's goal is to eventually make a living doing something they love. And actually, now that I say it out loud, it sounds like that's probably should be the goal about everybody. It's just finding something they love and pursuing it and being able to make a living doing it. So, but for now, it's a passion project, which, as you guys know, if you've been listening for a while, I'm completely okay with. It's about getting these conversations out. And that leads me to today's guest, author and researcher Charlie Robinson. He wrote the book, The Octopus of Global Control. You might have heard him on the Tinfoil Hat podcast with Sam Tripoli. He was on THC, the Higher Side Chats with Greg Carlwood, and a bunch of other podcasts. So after listening to this one, check out some of those interviews. They're great interviews. We talk about so many different conspiracies and historical events. So enjoy the show. Like I said, support the show, share the show, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace. Well, thanks for being with me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. You know, I'm a little late to the Ripple Effect party, but I saw you on Tinfoil Hat, and that's where I first sort of heard about you. And then I started to dig into all your stuff, and I was like, oh, I love this. Or maybe, I don't know. Did your group video come out before or after your Tinfoil Hat?
That was before. That was the Swapcast.
Yeah, that's where I first saw you. Then I saw you on Tinfoil Hat, and I had done that show maybe 2 months ago.
Yeah,
so I'm way into it, and I love Sam, and I like his style, and you were really good on it. So I reached out and said, hey, what's going on? I've got a book I wrote. You want to talk about it? And you're like, sure.
Well, it's funny because I heard you on THC. I've had Greg on like years ago when I first started the podcast, and then I saw you on Sam's show, and then, you know, when you contacted me, I'm like, well, that actually would make a perfect guest to be on, you know, and I'm a huge fan of what you're saying and your work and what you're putting out there. I think there's, you know, as many people as we can put out there that take the road that you take in trying to look at historical evidence and kind of, you know, connect the dots and really show so many dots that it's like, okay, now we've passed the line of coincidence and we're into actual conspiracy. And I think that's something that's really important because history is full of conspiracies. And I tell people all the time, I mean, we can talk about, you know, so many different historical events from all the coups in Central America to, you know, the coup in Iran and the Suez Canal and you know, it was a 56 when, you know, France and UK wanted to kill the president of Egypt and all this crazy stuff. And it's like this stuff, assassinations do happen, backdoor deals do happen, coups do happen. And it is weird when we look at it from a historical perspective, how you can talk about those historical stories and people tend to, you know, not really resist. They'll be like, yeah, that sounds like it's possible. That sounds like it happens. But once you start talking about current times, it's like, oh, no, that's conspiracy. And it's like, I'm sure people were saying the same thing at that time. You know, people were saying that there's no way the CIA was trafficking cocaine into the U.S. I'm sure, you know, that's all conspiracy bullshit, you know. And then as time goes by and things get exposed, then I think it becomes more realistic. But for some reason, it does seem to be a huge issue when you talk about current historical events. And I've heard you talk about, you know, how you would ruin family get-togethers by bringing up, you know, conspiracy stuff, and I think we all get tokened as the conspiracy guy, you know, because and I don't know how does that affect you? Does it bother you that, you know, or does that actually happen to you? Are you the conspiracy guy among your friends and family?
Well, first of all, I stopped talking about it. I mean, I kind of went as far as I could go with that stuff and then you start to figure out who in your circle of friends is receptive to it and who thinks you're a maniac. It's funny, we were talking about the history part. You know, like most people, I went through school, had history classes. I feel like I had to unlearn everything that I learned in history class and then learn a new version of history, because what I had been taught was so incorrect. It was so, I mean, it starts with the ridiculous concept of like Christopher Columbus came over and discovered the New World, and then the Pilgrims came over and they got together with the Indians and they had Thanksgiving dinner. And you're listening to this, you're going, oh, okay, when you're a kid. And then you look back on this and you go, was this before or after they slaughtered all of them? Because I didn't read about that in my history books, and how, like, oh, we discovered this new land with all these people already living here that had been there for 1,000 years. Like, so, you see that your history books, first of all, as they say, history is written by the victors, and it's also written by the country that manufactures the history books too. So is this huge slant in American history in particular that paints America as this unwilling participant in all these wars. They get dragged in, kicking and screaming against their will, but they have to stand up for the weak around the world, and they'll come in and we'll do all this. We'll fight the Germans for you. We'll do all this stuff because we have to preserve democracy. It's all total bullshit. It's total bullshit. It's not even partly true. And so, it's frustrating. Like you said, you go through history, you go through these stories, and you realize there's a ton of conspiracies, and and this is just kind of how foreign policy works. And so to question those is fine, but to question, like you said, the current events that are going on makes you a maniac. But the same lies that they told on these previous events, they recycle them and use them currently. So now it's not even really all that difficult, because you can say, like, you can predict something like the Syria gas attacks. I mean, everybody saw that coming to the point where when they said, oh, Assad gassed his own people, it was almost immediately everyone stood up and said, no, bullshit, not buying that. And then they went back to it, and then they went back to it a third time. It's like if you study history, if you look at how these events unfolded, what you'll learn is that the people that are in charge of this planet are not very creative. They tend to run the same plays over and over again. So if you'll see false flag events.
It works. That's probably because it works. Yeah.
Oh, of course. There's a chapter in my book called I wrote a book called The Octopus of Global Control. There's a chapter in the book called Student Body Right. And what that is I went to USC, but back in the 60s, they would hand the ball to O.J. Simpson, who was a running back before he was a wife and waiter murdering maniac. He would run to the right, and the entire offensive line would just pull and lead block for him with fullbacks and everything, and it was unstoppable. And so they would run student body right because it was a play that nobody could defend. And so the United States foreign policy, and in this particular case in the book, I talk about Israel's foreign policy with this, is that they've developed a plan that works, and they're going to keep running it until somebody figures out how to stop it. I think lately, though, we're starting to, with the alternative media, we're starting to have people are starting to, like a football defense would, they're starting to recognize formations and understand what play is coming before it comes. And so they're able to defend it. So I'm obviously a football fan, will I'll use that as a metaphor. But so when something like Syria happens, we understand that that they're going to fake a gas attack because they're losing. And so they're going to say Assad did it because what's the one thing that will create support for bombing the shit out of Syria would be if some maniac is gassing his own people. Therefore, we'll just say he gassed his own people. And there you go. There's support. But when you know that's coming, then you can stand up in advance. You can either call it out in advance, like a lot of people did, or you can just, as soon as you see it, you can recognize it and say, this is bullshit. This is exactly what they do. And if it doesn't get the result that they want, they'll run it again and they'll run it again. So, yeah, you're right. They've been doing these because they work. But the more we're aware of what's coming, the less effective they'll be, and they'll have to switch course a little bit.
Yeah, the Syria thing's interesting because you had Obama go on TV. He was talking about the chemical weapons, and really if a normal person who does zero research, I mean, just thinking about it logically, how would it make any sense to use the one type of weapon that is going to justify foreign intervention. Like, it made zero sense that, like, if you're gonna like shoot them, if he, like, Assad's not an idiot, and that's the thing. Like, if he was gonna hurt people or kill people, he wasn't going to use chemical weapons because he knew that would give the justification for the U.S. to get involved, and he didn't want that. So that alone made no sense. But it was interesting how they attempted to emotionally get people worked up with the chemical weapons and with the images and all that stuff, and it didn't seem to work the first time. And the people are like, no, we're done with like getting involved in foreign affairs, and it just, we don't know what's going on, and we're getting one side of the story and whatnot, and then they just kept doing it over and over again. They started showing beheadings and all this stuff, and then eventually, they won, but that showed you how it's not about, like, they'll just keep trying, and they'll keep sending you propaganda and using propaganda to get people to eventually jump on board. And even if we're not on board, sometimes they do it anyways. I mean, look what's going on in Yemen. Look what's going on in many parts of the world, conflicts that we're involved in. Most people just aren't really aware of where our tax money's going, and all the influence we're having all over the world, and governments and all types of stuff. So it's funny how, and you were talking about how we have the alternative media, but I think it's funny how it's almost having alternative voices and perspectives online. I think initially for like maybe somebody like yourself and for myself, like, it was great because instead of listening to mainstream media, listening to Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, or listening to the radio, you could go online and you could find these alternative perspectives that didn't seem to have agendas and seem like they really had truth in mind. They were really looking for truth, and they were truth seekers. But now there's almost so many alternative voices, and there's almost so much stuff online that it's become difficult to filter through what you can and cannot believe. I mean, Alex Jones gets a lot of shit, but initially, I mean, he was a part of a lot of people becoming, I guess, for a lack of a better term, woke. Right. He helped a lot of people become aware. And even if you didn't believe in everything he said, even same thing with like loose change in 9/11. I know they get a lot of criticism. You look at Oliver Stone and JFK. There's all these people who, Alex Jones, loose change, JFK. They all have a couple things in common. They get a lot of criticism for not being, accurate or whatnot. But they also should get a lot of fucking credit because those movies and that person, Alex Jones, they were a huge part in maybe just planting the seed of doubt in what we tend to believe or what we thought reality was, and maybe getting people curious and going down some rabbit holes and maybe eventually finding better resources, but at least it planted the seed.
I totally agree. Yeah, everybody phrases the Alex Jones thing almost the same way, which is, I don't agree with everything he said, but he did. He has had and probably continues to have a large impact with people that are just kind of waking up to this. And whatever it takes, really. If it's Alex Jones that wakes you up, or if it was JFK, if it was loose change, if it was watching Building 7 come down, if you didn't even know that there was a Building 7, but loose change woke you up to that, or Alex Jones woke you up to that, then that has been beneficial. And yes, he gets a lot of criticism, and people are saying he's controlled opposition, or that he's a Zionist shill, or he's this or that. And he might be all of those things. But he also was very effective at waking people up, and you don't have to agree with everything. I wrote a huge book, 540 pages. I guarantee you not everybody is going to agree with everything that's in my book, and that's okay too, because if you find one part in it that you connect with because it's important to you for whatever reason, then that will, and it plants the seed of doubt, or it exposes just a blatant lie in history, and you go, okay, that was a lie. What else is a lie? Then you're on the right track. So that's a good thing. And I think Alex did that for a lot of people. David Icke, same thing. I mean, David Icke gets a ton of criticism. They say, well, he's the reptilian guy. Well, you know what he also is? He's also the guy that called out the pedophilia in the establishment 20 years early. He did that, and he talked about how all of these secret societies are involved. He's right about a lot of things. Is he wrong about the reptilian thing? I don't know. Does it sound crazy? Fuck yeah, it sounds out of this world crazy. But that doesn't mean it's not true. I mean, listen, I've done enough mushrooms to understand that there is a world beyond what you can see with your eyes and hear in this reality that we live in. There are other dimensions. There are other frequencies. So is it crazy that there might be some interdimensional forces at work? Yeah, it would seem crazy to somebody that hasn't at least experienced that there's another version of reality than what we're living in. I think that he may be on to something. It may be something, that 40 years from now will become like, oh yeah, of course, everybody knows that, or that cat's out of the bag. I mean, he'll of course look like a maniac until that point, but I think that he should get a lot of credit for everything that he has been talking about, that he's been right about, and over the years. And speaking of that, I'm super excited because in about a month, I will see him speaking at in Acapulco, and I will be speaking there as well. I won't be speaking with David Icke, but I'll be one of the speakers there. But most of the time, I'll probably just be geeking out and listening to guys like him and Ron Paul and Dr. Cynthia McKinney and Luke Rudowski and Dan Dix and all those guys that are going to be, Jeff Berwick, who are going to be speaking there. So I'm excited. Going to finally see David Icke, unless the protesters break it up in advance, which I don't think will happen.
Yeah, if you he's kind of, it's funny because he's kind of gotten a lot of shit for that reptilian thing, but outside of that, if you look at all his other work, everything else is basically a lot of the same stuff you and I are talking about. I mean, everything from propaganda to foreign policy to manipulation of mainstream media and all this stuff. Like it's all basically the same stuff. It's just that, and he seems like he strayed away from that a little bit. Like he's not talking about it quite as much as he used to. And but I'm kind of with you where I kind of entertain all ideas, because I think like once you've uncovered some stuff and you realize like, holy shit, I've been completely wrong about this, or I was so unaware of this, then I feel like nothing is off the table. Like I should entertain all ideas. I mean, I watched a couple documentaries on the flat Earth theory, and just because I'm like,
me too.
Why not?
Why not?
Who was it? The guy Marty Leeds, who had a good one. He did one, and it was really interesting. And I'm like, what? I want to see both sides of the debate. I mean, to have a opinion without hearing both sides of the debate, I think is exactly the type of stuff we have at in these debates with our family members. Like it's the same thing. It's like people haven't looked into it. They have, I sound like Eddie Bravo. Look into it, but but Eddie's. I love Eddie because he's been on the show years ago, and same thing. He's right. I know he gets a lot of shit for being the flat Earth guy, but he's absolutely right when he says, how many people are you arguing with that haven't looked into it at all? I've gotten in arguments with people about vaccines. I have two kids, neither of them been vaccinated, and it's I've gotten in arguments with people, and I'm just like, you haven't looked into this at all. Like you have no idea what you're talking about, and it's but everybody agrees big pharma's bad, this and that. But when it comes down to vaccines, it's like, no, you should believe big pharma, but it doesn't matter if it's that, if it's 9/11, if it's all these. Vaccines and 9/11 seem to be two topics that you can really get people going with. JFK was like so long ago, and it's like so accepted that there was more to the story that people don't get as angry. But when it comes down to like more recent stuff, people get really emotional. But if you attempt to have a debate or just a conversation with them about it, you realize like they haven't done any research whatsoever. They've picked a side emotionally, more than likely, and then they just defend it. And because they just, from the outside looking in with no information, whatever you're presenting or whatever I'm presenting sounds insane. But when you do the research and like your book, The Octopus of Global Control, the idea of getting a lot of quotes from those in power, and James Corbett does the same thing. James has been on the show a 1,000 billion times.
He's the best.
Yeah, and
he really is.
Yeah, and that's why he's been on the show so often, because he's a huge influence of mine. And I'm glad I've been able to establish a relationship with him. But he gets so many footnotes. He gets quotes from from people that are involved, and it's just like it's undeniable. It gets to the point where it becomes undeniable, and I think that's really important. When you do the research, you realize like these dots that we're connecting aren't that far apart. They're much closer, and there's many more dots. And there's a reason why a lot of these conspiracies stay alive for so long, because of the fact that there is a lot of evidence that there's more to the story. Maybe the JFK assassination might never be solved, but there's enough evidence and there's enough amazing researchers out there to prove that without a doubt there's a cover-up, without a doubt there's more to the story than what the Warren Commission told us. And if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I wish that the people in the alternative media, or whatever you want to call it, the truth community, wouldn't divide themselves over things like 9/11, because you've got some people are saying, that there's directed energy, that's what it was, or some others say it was, it was definitely nanothermite, or it was just traditional bombs in the basement, or it was a suitcase. Okay, it could have been all of those things. Were there actual planes? Were there holograms? I mean, I understand that a lot of this is intentional disinformation designed to divide people. And we can all sort of have our beliefs of what exactly, how it all transpired. But the core point that we should all come together on is that it was a lie. 9/11 was a total lie, perpetrated by people within our own government and other governments. It was not 19 Arab hijackers with box cutters that did all this. It was far too complicated than that, and then just push. So if you're a directed energy person and you think that architects and engineers for 9/11 truth are full of it, that's fine. But for the common good, I feel like we should all come together and just start saying, hey, listen, we want answers on the actual event itself. We'll get into the details later. But first, I don't want it to be 50 years from now, like JFK, where everyone goes, oh, yeah, of course 9/11 was total bullshit. That needs to happen like immediately. That needs to, and I will say, someone like Richard Gage and those guys at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth did a great campaign on the 15th anniversary where they drove around with mobile billboards, and they had actual billboards all over New York City, and it just said, "Did you know that a third building fell on 9/11?" And I thought, oh, that is so genius. As somebody with a marketing degree, I was pissed I didn't think of it sooner, because it was so simple. And if you didn't know that, you would see that billboard and go, what are you talking about? And if you're thinking, oh, I know what happened on 9/11. 9/11 was the reason we went into Afghanistan and Iraq and blah, blah, blah. And then you see a billboard and you don't know that a third building fell. Well, what is your justification for like supporting all these crazy wars if you don't even know the real story? I mean, you don't even know any of the story if you don't know that Building 7 came down. So it's like, this education of people. We've allowed the media to educate people for 50 years, and that is a huge problem, because they are not on the side of truth. They have an agenda. They are infiltrated fully by the CIA, have been for 60, almost 70 years now. And so for us to think that we're going to get the truth from that is insane. So we were talking about my book, one of the quote aspect of it. The format of the book was that I brought in quotes from over 500 different people that had had some sort of involvement in some important events in world history. And of course, it's guys like the Bushes, the Clintons, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and all the usual suspects and maniacs like the Kissingers and Brzezinskis and people like that. David Rockefeller, you hear him talk about how he's saying, in his autobiography, saying that he's pushing for a one world order. And if that's the charge, I stand guilty and proud of that. So, I brought in all these voices, but I also, brought in guys like James Corbett and Joe Rogan and Bill Hicks and George Carlin so that you could have like a humorous look at this, because, James Corbett's 5-minute 9/11 video is one of the greatest videos I have ever seen, because it explains the ridiculousness of the story with the pretentious British trumpets playing in the beginning, which I find fantastic. And he did it in a way with humor that made you sort of laugh at the preposterous story that they've told, and yet afterwards want to research and find out if he was right about all those things, which of course he was. And so that was part of the inspiration for the way the book turned out, was that I took quotes, I took my opinions about these events, and then I added in just a really twisted sense of humor that I have, because you have to laugh at this stuff because some of it is so far out there that if you take it all super seriously, it's just too much, and you just go, I just want to go watch Netflix and just get away from this for a minute. So I thought that if I could add some humor. And I fuck with people in the book relentlessly, by the way. So like Lindsey Graham, I go after him pretty hard. The Bushes, the Clintons, because you got to have a good laugh at this. And I'm not really partisan. I'm not on the red team or the blue team. I'm sort of sitting off to the side, throwing rocks at both of them because they deserve it. And I think that they're ridiculous. And I think that the people that get into politics are out of their minds. So, that was my approach, was to say, like, you might think that I don't know what I'm talking about these topics, and that's fine. But would you believe it? You might think that the New World Order concept is just fake, right? That it's just a bunch of conspiracy theorists talking about this. Would you believe it if David Rockefeller, if you heard it, if you read it in his autobiography, that he's calling for the New World Order? Would you believe it if you saw that George H.W. Bush talked about it 200 different times during his 4 years of presidency? Would you believe it if you heard Mitt Romney talk about it, and Bill Clinton and Obama? And I lay out all these quotes. This is you can go look it up. They're talking about the plan. Now, the media doesn't fill in the blanks. They just play this as if these are just sound bites, and most of the time they actually hide them, so you don't ever really realize that. But my feeling was that, would it change your opinion of the New World Order concept, or the one world government, or false flags, or all that? Would it change your mind if you actually heard them talking about it? Or the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or or 5-star generals talking about, you need to be wary of the military-industrial complex? Like, would you take it seriously if you heard Eisenhower? Not me saying it, just some lunatic who wrote a book who maybe knows nothing. But would it matter to you if you heard Dwight Eisenhower saying on his exit speech, you have to be wary of the military-industrial complex? Like, yeah, so like my mom or someone else's parents might go, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, if Eisenhower said it, I mean, it would have a little bit more credibility. So that was sort of the point for it. It's like, if I could draw in all these voices, I felt like it gave me a much stronger case than being at a Thanksgiving dinner table by myself trying to have this argument and go, wait, I need to, but did you know that this guy said this? So that became the format of the book. And because to me, that's what I learned over the last 20 years, was when I would see a speech and hear somebody talk about it, or when David Icke would say, did you know that they said this, or did you know that Prince Philip said that he wants to come back, as if he ever dies and is reincarnated, he wants to come back as a deadly virus so he can wipe out the population. I mean, that's kind of an interesting quote, to have the guy that's married to the Queen of England be a total psychopath that wants to come back and kill everybody. So anyway, that was the structure of the book, and I think it works well. I had a lot of positive feedback saying, I never knew about that. I never heard that guy said that. Of course you didn't hear that George H.W. Bush, said all these things. He said that if the general public knew what we'd done to them, they'd chase us down the street and lynch us. They didn't play that on the nightly news, did they? Of course not, because it's a compromised medium that will never give you the truth. So we have to do their jobs for them.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And what you initially said about everybody kind of all the infighting into alternative media, I think that does become an issue. I mean, I've had guests on that, we talked briefly about 9/11, and they'll bash loose change, and that was all bullshit, and blah blah blah, and I'm just like, does it really matter? Like, if you can dissect it and find out that, okay, maybe that was a jump, maybe there wasn't any factual evidence to prove that, but I'm like, but the good it did in getting people to go down that rabbit hole, to get, I think that's much more important, because at the end of the day, if we all agree it's a cover up, if we all agree that something, isn't, the official story is bullshit and there's something more there, then that's the purpose. Like, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to expose that. Now, how it happened, everybody can debate that, but at the end of the day, we should all be on the same team, because we're all trying to expose the same people, and we're trying to expose the cover-up and get some justice. So I think that, and not just that, and expose the fact that we've been lied to. And I used the the metaphor before, I'm like, if you were dating a girl and she constantly cheating on you, you're going to stop, giving her the benefit of the doubt. You're going to say, now you're guilty until proven innocent. Well, that's the way we should look at our government. They constantly lie to us, They should be guilty until proven innocent. The fact that, like, people like ourselves who tend to probably believe that they're bullshitting you before believing that anything that they're saying, that's normal when you do as much research as we've done, when you've heard as many stories, when it just after a while it's just like, I don't believe anything they're fucking saying. And that's where you hear Eddie Bravo sometimes just say that. He's like, I just don't believe anything they're saying. I don't believe NASA. I don't believe and people look at him like he's crazy, but I kind of look at what he's saying like, that's kind of, if you do enough research, that's kind of the logical stance on everything, is that, hey, you know what? I've been lied to so many times. Why would I ever believe anything you're saying until I get evidence to prove that you're telling the truth? Not evidence that you're lying, because you've lied so many times, I'm just going to assume you're lying. I need evidence to prove that you're actually telling the truth this time. And I think that's the way people should look at it. But unfortunately, it just. But I think this goes to a bigger issue too. I think people are so busy with work and their priorities and all this stuff. They're exhausted. They don't have the time to do research. I mean, look at now with Russian Gate and all this, with Donald Trump, there's constantly news coming out every single day, and you can't keep up with it, to the point where, like I think you mentioned, like, ignorance is bliss. Like, you almost just want to go to Netflix and just don't watch anything political, any documentaries, don't read anything, and just kind of tune out for a little bit. And I think that's a huge issue.
Yeah, well, I joked with Greg Carlwood that I don't even believe the weather when it comes on the news anymore, because it's, I'm so, in disbelief of everything the mainstream media says. Yeah, one of the things that I did, I kind of almost just a spur of the moment type thing. I was watching. My mom had come over to my house and she was just hanging out. It just randomly came over, turned the TV on, and the San Bernardino shooting had just happened. I mean, 10 minutes earlier it had happened. It was the first I was hearing of it. It was the first she was hearing of it on the news, and it's breaking news, and it's all these things. And I turned to her and I said, I can tell you 5 things that are going to happen in this story right now. If I tell you these 5 things and they happen, will you believe me that this is a false flag, or that it's a non-event, or that it's a faked event? She's like, yeah, sure. So I went through what they were, and some of them were like, they'll find a manifesto, which of course they did. They'll contaminate the crime scene, which they did in their apartment when they just allowed. Remember when all the media came in and they were all just filming each other walking around? I mean, the police chief came out and said, oh, we have to close that. I mean, their apartment was a veritable bomb making factory. Really? Why'd you let all the press in? Were you trying to kill all the press? So there will be reports that the shooters were actually military guys that were white, and that happened. They'll kill the suspects. The suspects will definitely be dead. They'll be Muslims, or told that they're Muslims. All these things. It's not that I'm like calling Psychic Friends Network or anything like that. It's just that there's a script. There are things that happen. There's an agenda. If you understand what the agenda is, you just work backwards and figure out how these fake shootings come about. And so things like that if you watch it, or if you're involved in researching it, you'll start to see common denominators through all this. And part of it is that the media is complicit in this. They absolutely, positively do not investigate these real events. They'll investigate, if somebody got into a fight on the RTD bus, in your neighborhood, and there's video of it. They'll talk about that. They'll dig into that. But if there's a mass shooting, they're just going to go with what they're told. They're reading scripts. And if ever there was an example of them reading scripts about major global events, it would be 9/11, when they're reading the script of Building 7 falling down 30 minutes before Building 7 fell down. So how would you know that? Well, you would know that if and I don't blame the news anchors necessarily, because they were literally just reading scripts, but they're getting handed information that says this has already happened before it's happened. Well, that's a problem. That's a problem for anyone. So this is this reality that we're living in, this new media reality, is like a scripted fake television show. It's kind of like the Truman Show. The media is driving this in conjunction with the government, the militaries, the spy agencies, and all of these. It's all part of it. So we turn on the news, like you said. You talk about people that come back. They're so exhausted. They've been working 3 jobs. They flip on the news for 30 minutes. They get bite-sized 2-minute, 4-minute segments of the national news, and then based on that, that's their worldview, because they don't have the time to dig into it because they're too busy with, trying to keep their clothes on their kids and keep them fed and things like that. And that's totally understandable. But they go about with their worldview now shaped by what they got in 30 minutes from the mainstream media. And that is just, it sends you off into some new direction that is anything but reality. It's so far from the truth of what's going on. So when someone like you and I come out and say, what you believe and the things that you're seeing are not real, and it's actually this way, we sound crazy. Not because we're crazy, but because it's the first thought in their head. It's the first explanation of these stories that's in their head. And so to them, that's just the way it is. And anything else to the contrary sounds crazy. If I was able to get to them before the mainstream media and tell them how this event actually transpired, maybe it wouldn't sound as crazy to them, because it would be the first thing you hear. You'd say, oh, did you know that they wired, obviously, Building 7 was a controlled demolition? If you heard that on the day of September 11th and saw that going down, the opinions of what the event happened would be far different from that. But that didn't happen. People didn't see that. The media wasn't interested in giving you all sides of the story. They were interested in giving you one version of events. And that version of events is based on an agenda. And it's the agenda to do something else in the future. And then that does something else. So you look back and you go, ask the guy on the street, hey, man, why are we in Afghanistan now? There's no answer for it. The answer is, terrorism? Yeah, but beyond that, why are we there? I don't know. That's the general answer to most people. I don't know. Well, we're there because of 9/11. And if we go back and look at the lies of 9/11, then you have to scrutinize everything that happened after that point. So, okay, so if 9/11 was a gigantic lie, then Afghanistan by default had to be a lie, and so was Iraq. And all of these millions of people died, which we know were lies. Yeah. And all millions and millions of people died because of this. So it's an important thing. If we can't obviously go back and change that, but you can certainly stop this from happening again. And when you see something like Syria, everyone in the alternative media just goes, here we go again. Here we go again. This is the same strategy. They're going to do it again. They're going to try and drag you into this bullshit war in a country that didn't do anything to us because we have to spread democracy and humanitarian. Whenever you hear humanitarian mission, just understand that what that means is an invasion. We're never it's not humanitarian. You don't drop bombs on people for humanitarian reasons. Yet this is so the media sort of plays this and talks about these terms like humanitarian and spreading democracy. I mean, it's so Orwellian that it's laughable. And yet people who don't take a step back and analyze it just keep repeating it. Like, yeah, listen, man, we got to go into Yemen, spread some democracy. Oh, okay, yeah, that works really well as they're all dying from starvation. And what I thought was funny, if you might have saw this maybe 6 weeks ago or so, that Raytheon with their, was it Raytheon or was it Lockheed Martin? It was one of those two that did a Twitter kind of campaign like, hey, let us know where you see our products in use. And everybody was like, oh, we found your product written on the side of this bomb that destroyed a school bus and killed 50 children in Yemen. And they're like, yeah, we didn't want you. We weren't looking for that sort of ad campaign. And so everyone just kind of piled on. But like the insensitivity and the arrogance of these companies that were like, hey, we build missiles. Tell us where you like our products. We don't like your products. None of us like your products. Why are we spending money on bombs? Why are we doing all this shit when we've got much bigger issues here at home and frankly across the world as well? So it's a psychopathic mentality that is running this world, and And I have zero respect for the corporate media because they are they're working in conjunction to perpetuate this, and that's why people wonder why things are so screwed up here. A lot of it I lay at the feet of the mainstream media. They're not the only ones responsible, but they have done more damage to this country than almost anything I can think of, except maybe the banks.
Yeah, no, yeah, the banks. That's a whole nother conversation too. I mean, just how you talked about John Perkins and his book. It is very important because I think it kind of shows how without violence you can take over a country, and put them in debt and really have them by the balls. And the media, there's a great documentary I watched years ago called Shadows of Liberty, that really shows how corporations kind of manipulate the media. And also Outfox back in the day. I remember that was a good documentary that kind of showed the memos that anchors would actually get, like, hey, take this word out, hey, spin this story this way, don't spin it that way. And then Iraq for Sale was another good one. These were all like really big eye openers for me because you saw all the money that was just being thrown away to Hollenburn and KBR and all these contractors that were just making millions and millions to billions on the Iraq war. And it boggles your mind. And even recently I was sharing, and I think he's going to be on my show hopefully in the next week or two, Michael Susan. He's from, I don't know if you've seen the movie Backstabbing for Beginners. It's a great movie. It's on either Amazon Prime or Netflix, and it's about this young UN worker who went to Iraq soon after the invasion, and it was supposed to help with this program called Food for Oil, and it's supposed to. The UN is supposed to basically keep track of Iraq selling their oil and making sure that they're using the profits. They sell at market price and they're using the profits to basically get medicine and food and all that stuff to the Iraqi people because of the sanctions and stuff like that. And basically, he uncovered this huge conspiracy that he ended up, he was a whistleblower, uncovered this huge conspiracy of how everybody was making money and everybody was, I don't want to spoil the movie for anybody, so I won't get too into it. But it just basically was a grand conspiracy, and everybody was just profiting off this program, and how basically this program that was supposed to be to help the people and all this stuff, it was just all nonsense and bullshit. And that story, there's a billion stories like that, And
is he still alive? Or did they kill him?
No, he's still alive. He's actually, like I said, Michael hopefully will be on the show in the next. I think he emailed me this morning, and we're kind of working on scheduling, but he's still alive, surprisingly, not too many people who are whistleblowers are. But you look at actually, speaking of one, when I first saw your book, I thought it was about the Danny Castellero story because that was the octopus conspiracy, and there's not too much information out there on that story, probably because he ended up getting killed before he could really uncover everything. So a little bit about the Inslaw case and all that stuff, and that software that the government was selling all over the world and to other governments, but having a back door where they can spy on these governments or buying the software. And he was supposed to uncover, he was uncovering this big octopus conspiracy. And end up dying. And you look at Gary Webb, another great movie that's out, Kill the Messenger, which another great movie that was actually made, and I mean it wasn't promoted, but it seemed like it was a little suppressed from the public. But so there are some stuff out there, and if you watch those films, the fact that stuff is true, I mean, just think about it. Like a journalist exposes a giant conspiracy. If people aren't familiar with the Gary Webb story, please watch Kill the Messenger. It's a great movie. If if you're not into, it's great because if you're not into documentaries, it's a way of getting some historical information on this journalist who should be a heroic and historical figure, and getting that story in a way that easily consumed by good actors and good it's Hollywoodized a little bit. But yeah, that there's stuff like that, and that's why when the Seth Rich thing happened, and people are like, "Oh, that seems crazy," I'm like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" There's been, I mean, Gary Webb, Danny Castellero, I mean, the DC Madam, I mean, how many people have just accidentally died and got assassinated, and I mean, and historically, we've done it all over we've tried to kill Castro how many times with all types of booby traps and blowing up
Oh,
cigars.
but it's fine when we do it.
Yeah,
when we want to kill Castro, then it's fine. But when, God forbid, they want to interfere in our elections, then we have to stop that. I mean, the hypocrisy going on is crazy. But yeah, I was very aware of Danny Castellero, considering I was writing the book about the octopus at age 44, which is the same age he was when he was murdered. So yeah, I was not. I was hoping that I wasn't going to have the same fate as him, but he did quite a bit. And if people are unfamiliar with his work, that's something to check out for sure. And by no means did I even pretend that the octopus symbol was something that I came up with. It has been, in fact, one of the quotes from the book talks about John Francis Hylan, who was the mayor of New York City in 1922, and he talks about how there is a giant octopus that is controlling the government and the state house, the courthouses, and things in the media and all that. And that was like 100 years ago. So it's a symbol that's been used in advance. But yeah, Danny Castellero did a great job. Gary Webb, same thing. I think people are starting to kind of wake up to that. Oh, wow, he shot himself in the head twice. That's fascinating. But it's not limited to those guys. Now you're starting to see it with microbiologists that are getting whacked, astrophysicists that are getting whacked in large groups of people, large groups of them, to the point where it can't be accidental when you've got 30 microbiologists that get killed within like an 18-month period. They're all working on the same sort of thing, and so yeah.
Iranian scientists. I mean, there's
Iranian scientists, yeah, for sure,
and that's like public knowledge, and it's completely okay that like Israel and the West is trying to take out some scientists in Iran. It's like, why is that all right? And so I'm on the same boat with you. Like when people talk about Russia and if they interfered in our election, it's so not relevant, because the idea that like that's a huge deal, knowing the history of the U.S. and really Western powers in general, it blows my fucking mind. Like, what if they did create a fake Twitter account? What if like that's so minimal compared to what I know we've done that it's like it doesn't seem like that big of a fucking deal. Like it just doesn't bother me that much.
And I've also thought that first of all, if we're so focused on a foreign country interfering in U.S. politics and U.S. elections, then why aren't we talking about Israel? Why aren't we talking about how many dual Israeli citizens we have working in Congress or in the White House?
How much influence AIPAC has? And
yeah. You know how many dual Iranian U.S. citizens we have in Congress? I'll get you the list. Oh, wait, there's nobody on it. There's nobody on. There will never be anyone on. Do you know how many dual Russian U.S. citizens we have? We have zero. But Russia's interfering with the election? Give me a break. I have a theory on that, and I can't prove it. But my theory is that Hillary Clinton, through the Clinton Foundation, we all know that they raised a fortune through that money laundering, pay-for-play operation, with, of course, obvious implications as to what that money was for, with the assumption that she was going to win. When she didn't win, I think that the people, the countries, the individuals that financed, that put those billions with a B into the Clinton Foundation were like, where's our money? Where's our money? What happened? And she said, the Russians stole it. The Russians stole the election. I didn't lose it, because she would never admit any sort of issues on her end. It's always somebody else. But I think they came looking for their money, and she said, I had it in the bag, but the fucking Russians, they stole it. They swung it for Donald Trump. Don't come after me. They're the problem. And then the media, of course, has just been pumping Russia, 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 Russia. I mean, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing for me.
Because there's about zero evidence of anything that could really have a huge influence on the election. I mean, there's zero evidence of any real influence on the election. And if there was, it would have been exposed by now, because I mean, basically, everybody hates Donald Trump, so I mean, somebody would have exposed it by now. But it's insane. And the thing with Hillary is, like, again, this goes back to the power of propaganda. Like, there's all this hatred towards Trump, and I'm far from a Trump supporter, but the idea that Hillary is this great person. It's like, do you know what's going on in Libya right now because of her? Do you know I mean, and even if you go back to her husband, I mean, everybody has, thinks it's these glory days of being out of debt, and everybody had work and all this stuff. But a lot of the things he didn't have a serious effect on the economy or the country till years later. I mean, adding China to the WTO, you look at, the 3 strikes and you're out, he basically helping inflame the prisons, with that. And so there's all these things that at that time, you probably didn't seem that significant to some people, but now looking back, you realize they had a huge effect on the country. But the thing is, the bottom line is, like, and that's what I love about James Corbett. And when I had that swap cast, I talked about it, how James at the end of Obama's, I think it was like it was right. I think he was just about leaving office. He came out with a short documentary about Obama and his legacy, and then soon after, like I think probably a couple months after that, Trump gets elected, and then he comes out with a short documentary called "Filling the Swamp." And he sees through the bullshit. So when you get people who want to talk about Hillary and Trump and all this stuff, it's like, to me, it's like I'm so just I'm not interested at all, because it's just like you're falling for the theater. You're falling for all this nonsense. Yes. You're falling for, you want to talk about what the puppets are doing, and I want to talk about what the people, controlling the puppets are doing, and so to me it's not interesting. And you get people who pick teams and whatnot, and then there's all this infighting and all this arguing, and then at the end of the day, like, everybody does business with the same people. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter if it's a Republican or Democrat in office. The military-industrial complex continues to grow. We continuously get involved in the Middle East and influence other foreign governments and elections, and that doesn't change. And I mean, from all the research you've done, when you look at somebody like Trump, because if you go back and you look at his debates, right, he said all the same shit, or at least a lot of stuff that maybe you and I might say. Like he was really, one thing that I really loved about him being in the debates, that he was willing to pull back the curtain and let people see back there by saying, "Oh yeah, I've given money to both of you guys. You guys will do whatever the fuck I want," or right. And all this other stuff, and really kind of exposing it a little bit. But once he got in office, it's clear that obviously, the president has minimal to no power, and the CFR and all these people who are really having an influence on foreign policy and all, they're the ones who have the bigger plan, and they're not going to let some president who might be in office for 4 years get in the way of that. What do you think happens when somebody becomes president? Do you think that, like, they just have zero power and they just have so much going on and so much outside influence that whatever you believe, even if and I don't know, but even if he did want change, that you just couldn't change things if you wanted to?
Yeah, I think that is what happens. I think that even the people, if they were to get in there with good intentions, and I don't think many of them have good intentions, but if Trump, let's just go with this, that he said, "Fuck it, I've done everything I can do in my life. I've made a lot of money. I've been on TV show. I'm famous. Now I want to go break the system, because the system needs to be broken." And he comes out on his campaign and says, "Because you'd be in jail." That, by the way, I think that got him the presidency, that one line to Hillary, because she couldn't really say anything about that. If he got into, when he became president, I don't think he has the flexibility to do the things that he wanted to do, even if he really wanted to do that. Now, people will debate whether or not he just said it to get in and then had no intention of wanting to change things, or if he really meant to. But either way, once you get in there, you're very confined. I mean, the system itself is broken, because the people running the show are not the best of the best. They're the most corrupted of the best. They're the most compromised. You get, lately in the news, there's been a lot of Jeffrey Epstein about that, and people understand he's running a blackmail operation, but for the Mossad. I mean, that's what he does. That's what he does. He gets politicians or prominent businessmen or lawyers or think tank heads in situations where he gets them on film with underage girls or boys or smoking crystal meth or whatever it is they're doing. He gets you in a position where they've got the goods on you. Then you're controllable. And if it's pedophilia, then you're controllable forever. And so by the time these guys get to off, and if you don't think that's happening, let's talk about Dennis Hastert, who was a notorious pedophile, and he was like 3 steps away from the presidency. So these people get into positions of power, Ted Heath, over in the UK, and all these child molester types.
And a lot of really interesting stuff with Anthony Weiner, who obviously has connections to Hillary because of his wife and all this other stuff. So people, I mean, it sounds outrageous and insane, but there's so much evidence out there. It's just
when there's that much at stake, you can't, like you said, you can't afford to have some rogue guy in the White House. So Trump has done, some dirty things over his career in business. But you know what's funny about him, and I'm in the same way as you. I don't like him. I don't like Hillary. I don't like any of the players. But what I like about him is that for 2 things. First of all, he makes those people super nervous, and he makes them insane. And I love that. Anybody that can make those people go totally nuts, I like that aspect of him. But what I've also kind of come to appreciate, and this is maybe like not the greatest thing, but he has no shame. So you can't really shame him. Remember when all the grab him by the pussy stuff came out and everyone's like, oh, that's it. He's done. He's done. He's not done because he doesn't think he did anything wrong and he doesn't care about it. And so they tried to shame him and tried to bring up dirt on him. And he's like, yeah, I got dirt. Yeah, I don't care. Yeah, I said all these things. Or I said this. You've got me on tape saying it. And then he just goes, I didn't say it. And you just shake your head and you go, are you out of your fucking mind? You're on video saying it. Wasn't me. And so you have to, like, in a way, respect the insanity of this, because he might just burn the whole system down, which I would be fine with. I hope that happens. I don't think that it will. But you talked about like how much influence they have when they get. What do you think happens when they get into office? There is something that happens on day one when they're in that presidential elect world before they've been sworn in, but after they've won the election. There's always a trip that happens to the White House where they go in, they meet with the existing president. Obama did it with Bush, and Trump did it with Obama, where they walk in, they wave to the cameras, they go into the White House. They come out like 3 hours later, and the president-elect looks like he's seen a ghost. He's just pale white, and he's like, thanks for coming out. There is something that happens during those meetings. Same thing happened with Obama. He looked like he saw something he wasn't expecting to see. There's got to be something in there that happens. And I know Bill Hicks does a funny bit about how they put the blinds down and they show you an angle of the Kennedy assassination you've never heard, you've never seen before, and they say any questions and you say what's my agenda. It's probably something like that. I'd be curious to know what that is. I'm not going to pretend to know what it is, but there is some sort of delivery of information that happens during that meeting that scares the shit out of the incoming president. And maybe it's pictures of, or it's an explanation by the people that are really running the show that this is a symbolic position that you're in, and that if you get off course, we'll kill your entire family. So, I'm sure that's probably part of it, but I don't know for sure.
Well, you look at the NSA, I mean, the power that they have of just spying on everybody. I mean, they could have basically dirt on just about anybody, anywhere. Sure. And why wouldn't they hang that over your head? I mean, the NSA used to be called no such agency, because for a long time it was so secretive, nobody knew what it was. And so who knows how long this has been going on, where they could be, in the CIA historically, the FBI, Edgar Hoover, he's blackmailed people or attempted to, and so it's some people believe he blackmailed Kennedy, and what's blackmailing Martin Luther King. And so it's one of those things where it's quite possible where when you have that ability, that much access to information and text messages and all this stuff and video cameras and all this stuff, then you could hang anything over their head. And really, these rich, powerful people are into it's what seems a lot of fucking crazy shit. And I've had Roger Stone on my show, but he didn't say this on my show. He was, I think it was when he was talking to Jim Norton on his show, and they were talking about how he's into some weird sexual stuff, him and his wife, and like, you know, they've done, I don't know if they were seen at like a swingers bar or whatever, this and that, and they got and Jim Norton's kind of into that weird, you know, he has some weird fetishes. But what was interesting was that Roger Stone was talking about it, about how a lot of really powerful people also have these weird, have these fetishes, and I think when, you know, if I have a Ford, then when I buy a Mercedes, it brings me a certain type of happiness, and then when I get a Ferrari, it'll bring me some more happiness because it's better than the last thing. And or if I have a $1 million house and then I buy a $2 million house, but you get to a point where you have everything. You know, these guys are rich, they're powerful, they have like. It kind of seems like that movie. What was that old movie? That horror movie, Hostel, where, you know, it's just like these rich people who basically are like, they can't be satisfied with any material things because they've done it all, and they need to bring it up to the next level. And it's like these weird things are what turns them on. I mean, I don't know if you ever watched the documentary Tickled. It's another. No. Oh, it's another kind of weird documentary about this guy who he was just an investigative journalist, and he was online. He found this website where basically it was just a bunch of like college kids getting like tickled, and it was like, you know, he's like, this is kind of fucking weird, you know. So he starts investigating it, and come to find out, there's like these rich, powerful people who are blackmailing these kids. Well, basically saying, we'll give you money to let us tickle you and film it, and you're in college, you're broke, you're like, why not? And then he slowly started exposing the fact that like there's this rich, powerful person, and nobody will say who he is, who's controlling all this, and it's like they have this weird fetish, and anybody who's spoken out about it or said anything about it, they'll release these videos of them being tickled to like all over the internet, and humiliate the kids who are involved. And it was like this creepy fucking documentary, and you're just like, something that innocent, that's just some, you know, like somebody being tickled, there was like, it turned into this really dark documentary. And it's like, you think about it, and it's like, that's no different than all these other like pedophilia parties and all these other weird things. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein, like you said, he's been in the news a lot. I mean, this guy hangs out with Bill Clinton, has hung out with Donald Trump. I mean, I mean, he has a record of hanging out underage girls, and a lot of them are finally talking. I mean, look at the R. Kelly thing that just came out, or, you know, now he's in the conversation with Epstein, because, you know, they have the documentary that's coming out, I think, on Life Network, and they're saying how it's kind of like cultish, that whole thing. But it's like, it's rich and powerful people. It's like they almost need something else. It's like a drug addict. It's like, I've used all the, you know, the strongest dosages of this drug, I need something stronger, and that seems like the psyche that's going on. That seems like that might be what's happening.
Yeah, and it's also like a gang ritual too. You know, it's like you gotta commit your crime in order to get into the gang, and then once you're in the gang, then you can't leave. They've got the goods on you, so you're kind of stuck. And you know, I put a quote in the book from Newt Gingrich when Trump was, I don't know if he had just won. He might have just won, or he was, or either way, Newt Gingrich said he's not a member of the secret societies. He's not a part of the club. You know, he's going to have a hard time in Washington because he's not a member of that society. And I think a lot of people probably just thought he meant the political establishment, but what he really was talking about was the dark secret society. You know, the party after the party. Yeah. The pedophile parties. That, you know, and like we talked about, they can capture you on film doing these things. They can also manufacture it out of nothing. So even if you've done nothing wrong, it's really hard to explain to your wife or your constituents or the general public how they have a video of you with a 8-year-old boy when you really weren't with an 8-year-old boy. You know what I mean? And so they can, even if you're not into that, they can create a situation where you just look guilty as hell. So it is as we peel back the layers and see what's really going on, you know, underneath it all, like David Icke talked about with the Jimmy Savile stuff.
Yeah,
you start to see that there are fixers. There are people that are protected, and they're protected because they provide services for the rich and powerful, and the rich and powerful in exchange make sure that they aren't prosecuted for their things. So Jimmy Savile, if people are unfamiliar with him, I'm sure your audience is, but he's besides looking like the devil, he probably was. There's a great documentary talking about, was Jimmy Savile a wizard? And I watched that, and I thought I knew the story, but then when I saw that documentary, it painted an even deeper, darker picture about him being really like a leader of the Luciferian sort of underground, and he is directly connected to the British monarchy. I mean, he was the go-between between Prince Charles and Diana when they were breaking up. He was knighted. He is a friend of the Queen. He is a friend of Prince Andrew. He was a friend of all these people, and he was a supplier of children for them. And so you go, wow, another conspiracy. Yeah. A conspiracy fact, of course, because after his death, they're always protected until their death, too, by the way. Once they're dead, then things tend to leak out a little bit. But while he was alive...
Princess Diana, another conspiracy. Have you ever watched the documentary A Unlawful Killing? It's really good documentary about
very good.
The father of her boyfriend is the one who funded it.
Jody Fayed, it's a great movie, for sure, and it shows that there's a whole lot more to it. Wow, the royal family would you think they would kill somebody? Of course they would. I mean, they've started wars. They don't have a problem whacking one person and making it look like a car accident gone wrong and things like that. I mean, of course, that is one thing that a lot of people have been protected of their entire life is coming to terms with the fact that the people running the show are maniacs. And they have you and I don't have any interest in being the president of the United States because we're not crazy people. We're not we're not getting off on controlling people. We're not getting off on hurting or power, or using leverage, or squashing this person, or screwing up that country, or I got to build a pipeline there, so let's bomb the shit out of this place. And if it kills 1 million people, then it kills 1 million people. We would never consider that. And so a lot of people take that mentality that they have, that they would never do it, and they incorrectly assume that other people wouldn't do it. And they they go, well, he would never do that. I mean, Obama would never do that. Obama's Obama, man. He's cool. He likes to play basketball. And he called Kanye West a jackass. And Obama ordered drone strikes on weddings and then hit them an hour later once the ambulances arrived, okay? He is a psychopath. And he had a great smile, and he had a good rap, and he talked, and he was great on the campaign trail and everything. But you have to understand the reality of the situation, that these people are murderous thugs. And they're in positions of power, not on accident, but because they've been allowed to come to these positions of power because they work for somebody above them. So like you said, when people are talking about red team versus blue team, that's a distraction. That are two sides pretending to fight each other, pretending to hate each other, because they're all out on the golf course with John Boehner as soon as the congressional session ends. They're all out together in La Quinta playing golf, okay? Because I've seen it. And so this is how it works. You go, hey, wait, Nancy Pelosi, she's supposed to hate the red team. She's on the blue team. It's the same team. It's the purple team. Okay, they're all mixed together. And so when we get focused on worrying about one team versus the other, or who's going to win the next election, or Congress is going to be all, this is all by design. This is all intentional, and it's a distraction for us, because while we're watching this show, they are running around the back, looting the place, running it, and doing their own things, giving contracts to their buddies. All this stuff is happening, and the political theater that is being presented to us on the nightly news is just entertainment, and it's shitty entertainment at that. So the people that go out on the streets and riot and everything. I'll tell you what I liked recently that I saw. I liked the Yellow Vest protest, because it seemed like it started with one thing and it sort of mushroomed into something else. Now, like most of these protests, eventually it will be corrupted, compromised. They'll bring in the agent provocateurs that will start to screw things up, and then they'll demonize the whole movement. But initially, at least, they always start off organic, and they're getting some change. I mean, and then you go, well, I don't see that on my nightly news. Of course, you don't see that on your nightly news. They don't want to give you any ideas, So we're in this world where we turn on the TV at night and we get sucked into the nightly news as if that's the only explanation of what's really happening in the world, and it's far from the truth. And so, guys like James Corbett have done a really good job of tackling a variety of topics. And so I was happy to see him on your show. I just watched New World next week. Yeah, a couple of minutes ago too, the newest ones, and it's great. I love that. I love the comedy aspect of it, that they can make this horrible shit funny, and you've done that too. I mean, you get great guests on your show.
Yeah.
A lot of really like. I mean, I don't know how you got Roger Stone. I'm not saying he's a good guy. I'm just saying, but he's an interesting guest.
Yeah, no. Well, and that's the thing. I have anybody. I mean, I've had Jack Abramoff on. I've had,
Oh, really? Yeah. I watched a documentary on him too. That was fascinating.
Yeah, Casino Jack. Yeah.
Casino Jack.
And there's also an HBO movie with the Kevin Spacey, which is interesting. But he was playing a bad guy. Now apparently he is a bad guy. But but absolutely, it's one of those things where it's. I mean, even talking about Casino Jack, one of the things you were talking about, these guys playing golf and how it's all theater and bullshit. I mean, in that documentary, I don't know if you recall the part where they opened up a factory on this like island, and they could basically say that and the products were made in America, but even though they weren't, and technically they weren't because it was American territory, but they didn't follow the same laws, so they could have sweatshops. And then a bunch of politicians were sent there to scope it out, and instead of actually seeing the factories, they just played golf and stayed at like a 5-star resort. And that's the thing. The game is rigged, and it's no different than like if you found out. Okay, you love football. I'm a Patriots fan, and I watch I'm a big Celtics fan. Basketball and MMA is kind of my two favorite sports, and soccer. And but I'm Portuguese, so I have to watch soccer. It's against my religion now too. But it's one of those things where like if the reason why, and soccer is actually a pretty good example. A lot of people get upset when they find out that there's cheating and all this stuff, because it's really, really important that if I watch this game, that I feel like it's not a rigged game. That what the outcome actually matters. Well, it's the same thing with our political system. Like, we understand it's a rigged game. So whatever the outcome is, does it really matter, or do I really care? Because I know that it's all bullshit anyways. There's all these backdoor deals. Lobbyists are actually giving the memos on like, put this language in this bill, and that's why sometimes you see politicians talk about certain bills and they don't look like or seem like they've read them, because a lot of times they haven't, and it's they're just voting for it based on who paid them. And Jen Brimey does a good podcast called Congressional Dish, and she reads all the bills, and she talks about how like you can see how people vote based on who gives them the money, and it's consistent, and it doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, red team, blue team. And so it's like, okay, so when people are debating political nonsense, it's like you're debating who's winning or who's right, but it's a rigged game. So like, it doesn't matter. Like, at the end of the day, Lockheed Martin, Goldman Sachs, these guys are the ones influencing who's in the who you're choosing for your cabinet, who your advisors are going to be. And consistently you see that. I mean, there's that story with Obama getting an email from somebody from connected to Goldman Sachs saying, "Hey, we recommend these people for your your cabinet or for advisors or whatnot," and then most of them got picked. And it's just, that happens all the time, and that's why you see guys like Kissinger, Brzezinski's, and they work with Republicans and Democrats, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They know that it doesn't matter what your ideology is. Like, it's all about money and power, and that's the ideology. That's where they all come together, and it's all pro wrestling, like Jesse Ventura says. It is pro wrestling, and that's why they don't cover pro wrestling the day after on ESPN, because it was a scripted event, and so there's no point in it. So. I actually put a bit in my book about it being pro wrestling, and I joked that the only thing missing is Donald Trump in like a old vintage Mexican wrestling mask, like climbing up on the top ropes and just jumping down on a disoriented Hillary Clinton, who rolls out right before and
tags Bill, the sexecutioner Clinton, who comes in and beats Trump to death with one of Lindsey Graham's black dildos. So that I put that in there because it's as ridiculous as what we're currently seeing, which is it's just political wrestling. And
but I actually think,
and it's
I think Bill would actually turn on Hillary. It'd be one of those things where like, oh my God, he actually turned on her, and because they don't like each. They haven't even been seen together since the election. Like it's not. Like, it's all nonsense. And it's also interesting, like, what Roger Stone talks about, is their daughter, is she really Bill's? That's an interesting. And you know what? For him to put that in a book and to publicly say that and not get sued, it makes you wonder. Like, it makes you wonder if there's some truth to that, because it's if somebody was saying that and there, it was complete false and nonsense, you would sue the shit out of the publisher, and they wouldn't even let you publish it. They would be like, you have to be fucking sure, because if not, we're gonna get sued and we're gonna lose a lot of money. So it makes you wonder if some of his claims that seem a little crazier, if there's not more to the story.
Yeah. Well, what about
his son, Bill's son too?
Oh yeah, that I was gonna say Prince Harry. Prince Harry looks exactly like James Hewitt, who was dating Princess Diana, or had been a friend. They if you put a picture of Hewitt next to Prince Harry, they're like identical. Doesn't look a damn thing like Prince Charles. So that's just a conspiracy theory. You can look into it. Right?
But like I said, nothing is off the table. Like when you research this stuff, it's like we could talk about topics and topics and topics and topics, and it's like, nothing sounds ridiculous to me, because it's like so many things that would sound ridiculous to a person who hasn't looked into it or looked it up or done any real research. I could be that person who just hasn't done any research and it sounds ridiculous. So I tend to reserve my judgment until I do my own research.
And that's why we were talking earlier about the flat Earth thing too. Is like as crazy as it sounds on the surface, the last thing you want to do is be dismissive with that, the way other people are dismissive about vaccines. When you bring that up, you want to sort of like, you'd like for them to be respectful of your position, at least hear you out. So when it comes to the flat Earth, I take that same approach, which is I'll hear you out. I had that conversation with David Weiss, who has done that. He's had a podcast for a while, and he's an interesting dude. But I had been on Veritas Radio, and he had been on there as well. And so I got an email from him, and he's like, "Hey man, I want to talk to you." So I picked up the phone. I had a 2-hour conversation with him, and he goes, "Well, listen, I have to confess something to you." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, I'm a flat earther." And he said it. It was like as if he was saying like, "Dude, I'm an alcoholic," like it was sort of like, and he said like, "Does that change your opinion about me?" And I said, "Listen, I've watched videos, I've looked into it, and what I will say is that you guys make a much better argument than I was expecting."
Yeah.
So I'm not saying I'm in it. I'm just saying that the argument that you guys put forward was a little bit better than what I was looking for. I mean, I still need more evidence, and I probably need what it really exposes the fact that I know very little about geometry. So I probably need to do that. But you talked about Marty Leeds and everything. That's a dude who's into numbers, and he. So anyway, I'm open to learning. As if I look at the flat Earth and I'm super dismissive about that, I think about all the other things initially I was dismissive of that I've come to understand as being true, and so I don't know. I mean, the flat Earth thing, the one thing that made me that I did tell him that I thought was really suspicious, and it doesn't prove anything at all, but I always thought it was suspicious that the UN's flag was laid out like a flat Earth with 33 sections of 33 little squares around that. Like I said, doesn't prove anything, but I thought that was of all the things you could have had a planet, but whatever. So
well, the thing about my show too is I've had a lot of people who have nothing to do with alternative media, and when you talk to these people, and I've not too long ago, at the end of last year, I did a couple of shows where some people who are kind of high profile, who off air when we stopped recording, got into some conspiratorial conversations, and they asked like, "Hey, are you recording?" And I'm like, "No." I'm like, "Don't worry, I'm not gonna get you fired." I'm like, "I'm not. You told me not to record. I'm not recording." And you'll be amazed by how many people are like that, where they, like you said, it's almost like, hey, are you going to think differently of me if I actually say I believe in this, or I tend to agree with you with this or that? But it's demonized where you look like a kook, and they've done a great job of making people who seem very logical and just kind of, not controversial. If it's just easier to follow that path than maybe say, hey, I tend to believe this conspiracy or that story, or I think that the official story is bullshit, and then all of a sudden these red flags come up, because now all of a sudden you're grouped in with the Alex Jones, you're grouped in with the David Ickes, you're grouped in with, and it's like, oh, what do you believe in, reptilians, or what do you believe in, in flat Earth? So it's but it's, to me, and this is why I'm similar to Joe Rogan. I have a lot of different interests, and what I hope to do is have people on like yourself who are into history and alternative news and all that stuff and alternative perspectives, and then have somebody who maybe listen to a show I did recently with John, you're a sports fan, John Brenkis from Sports Science. I just had him on. Somebody might listen to the show because they're a fan of John, and then next thing you know, they hear, like, oh, let me check out more shows. Now all of a sudden they dive down this fucking rabbit hole of this podcast. Yeah. And so I intertwine that stuff. And I remember Aaron Franz, he did what the hell was his documentary he did? He did a real good documentary on singularity and transhumanism and all this stuff years ago. But I remember him telling me, he's like, oh, one thing I love about your show is, and I didn't really think about it until he brought up, but he's like, oh, but you have all these different guests. And then it hit me. I'm like, yeah, the positive thing is that I'm gonna, like, somebody might not listen to Alex Jones or listen to James Corbett because they just assume, oh, that's all just this type of stuff, and I'm not into that type of stuff. But if somebody's a fan of, I've had the singer Fear Factory on, or if I had, the guitars of All That Remains on, a musician, they come on because they want to hear, more podcasts like that. And all of a sudden they get exposed to James Corbett. They get exposed to Tinfoil Hat with Sam Tripoli. They get exposed to your work. Like, to me, it's like, that's a good thing, because it's like, okay, this Ricky kid, this dude who seems really logical and level-minded when he's talking to this artist I like, or talking to John Brenkis, he doesn't seem insane. He doesn't seem like, so now when he's talking to Charlie and him and Charles are having a conversation about all this other stuff, like, maybe there's something there, because he doesn't seem like so if they only heard me talk about conspiracies, and only they might think like, okay, he's crazy. But when you hear me talk about other things and have other guests on, and actually I'm sometimes surprised that people come on, and I'm like, do you know I've done a podcast on vaccines, and I've done a podcast with Dr. Brzezinski, I've done a podcast, it's like, I wonder how much research they do before deciding to come on the show. I mean, John Brenkis, he actually contacted me to come on the show, and I'm like, I just did like a 2-parter on the JFK assassination, So it's amazing. It amazes me, but I think it's good because we get this intertwined. If it helps expose people to your work and other people's great work, then it's awesome. And for me, it's awesome because I'd like to talk to just interesting people from all facets.
Well, I agree with that, and I like that philosophy too, because I went to see Joe Rogan in Denver a couple years ago, and he said, when he came out first, he said, all right, I want to just do a quick survey. How many people are here because of UFC related stuff? Probably half the people raised their hand. And he said, how many people are here because of the interview I did with Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson? About the other half raised their hand. And he said, how many people are high? And everybody raised their hand. So, but it was such a weird mix, everyone, sort of the common thread was Joe. Absolutely. And yet the crowds were vastly different, and they sort of coexist. So, that some of these UFC guys have gotten into some of the science because they just listen to Graham Hancock and they hear him, and he's unbelievable. And some of the more scholarly people that are into his Jordan Peterson interviews come in, and then next thing you know, they're getting exposed to hearing some guys that are talking about UFC, or they're talking about sports science and things like that. And so I think it's great. I think when you cover more than one topic, you get more than one type of audience member, and that's good, because then they can kind of cross-pollinate, and you can maybe rub a little bit of that off on that guy and some off on the other person, and everybody gets a little education on some topics that maybe they wouldn't have looked into, but because they believe in you, because they like you and they trust the way that you have credibility to them, then they're willing to give you the benefit of the doubt and learn about a topic that they wouldn't have tackled, except that you brought it up. You decided to show this to them, and so that might be the one thing that wakes them up, and they go, "Oh my God, that seems like a very reasonable." He put together a very reasonable argument, and I never looked at it that way. And maybe if that's true, then what else is true that I incorrectly believe, and things like that. So I have found over the course of my sort of awakening that people are much more inclined to listen to what you have to say when you approach them with hey, I have discovered this information and I'm having a hard time making sense of it. Do you think you could take a look at this and help me make sense of it? That, as opposed to, this is the way it is and you're wrong. If you don't believe it, then you're wrong. That doesn't work. Nobody likes to be told they're wrong or shouted down or like backed into a corner, but the approach of like, help me understand, help me understand how this big building fell down without being hit by a plane. They go, what big building? Well, the 47-story building in New York that came down on 9/11. What? Well, help me understand how it came down. Oh, well, that's because of office fires. Really? Is that what you think? No, actually, the more I look at it, the more I realize I don't have a good answer for you. Shit, I never thought about that. And so that approach works to me better than clubbing them over the head. And I think that your platform and Joe Rogan's platform and people that bring in sort of a variety of voices on random topics that don't seem to connect, they connect because at its core, it's something that you're interested in. And if you're interested in all these conspiracies, but you're also interested in sports science and you're also interested in music, and you've got this interesting dude on who talks about music, well, I'm more inclined to listen to it now, even though I wouldn't have even ever I wouldn't have known who that guy was. But it would be fascinating to me because I know it's fascinating to you. So, so congratulations on getting all the guests that you've had. I realize I'm lowering the bar here. For
not at all. Well,
but I'm okay with that because I'm okay with that. I just like talking about this stuff. Yeah. I like that maybe it will impact you. I did. You mentioned hearing me on Higher Side Chats. I love Greg Carlwood. And that is an example of topics that I would have never tuned into. And so I did that show because I reached out to him and said, I really want to be on your show because I love your show. I want to be a part of that world, of all those different topics. And what happened because of that? I get an email from Benny Wills from Joy Camp saying, I heard you on there, and I heard you mention you're going to be at Anarchapulco in February. I'm going to be speaking there. I'd really like to meet you. I'm like, holy shit, I love your work. I'm really glad you said that because I want to meet. I didn't know you were going to be speaking there. So now we're making these sort of like connections. And you never know what's going to happen. You never know who's going to hear what we're talking about, and it's going to like really ring a bell for them, and they're going to go, "Holy shit!" That matters to me. That whatever you guys were talking about, that one little thing made me think of something in my life, and it changed it. So maybe this is just me doing whatever I can, to sort of right, I don't know, the injustices of the world. This might be a bit of a stretch, but to see all this insanity and not try to say something and wave my arms and ring the alarm bells and say, dude, there's some major problems. We've got some big problems. Wake up. Like maybe I feel like that I just have to do that in order to sort of cleanse my, to be guilt free about it. I want to do as much as I can, but so doing shows like this and talking about it, you never know who it's going to reach. Yeah. Hopefully a lot of people.
I mean, that's why I named it the ripple effect, because I was all about this idea that we can all make a difference, and the opposite idea of thinking that you can't make a difference is very dangerous. I mean, that's how you keep people just kind of, sheeple and going with the waves and going with the motions. It starts with you believing that you have to do something and feeling like you have to do something. And regardless what you accomplish, I think, just doing anything, like sparking the conversation. A lot of times, I'd have conversations with people before I started the podcast, and people were like, well, what are you going to talk about? Who's going to listen? And it's, I'd get some friends that were like really excited about it. And I had some friends that kind of, negative about it. Like, how are you going to get guests? Are you going to, and I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I'm just going to talk. And Joe Rogan was a huge influence of mine. I have to give him credit because, we have a little family-owned construction company, and I would be doing a lot of commuting, 2-hour drives one way and then back. So it'd be 4 hours on the road, and I'm like, okay, I can either just take a couple calls and then what? What the fuck am I going to do with the rest of this drive? I'm like, I can listen to the same music over and over again. And then I got into podcasts. I'm like, Joe Rogan, one, they were long, so it took up a lot of my drive, which I loved. And two,
he's a Boston guy too. You probably like that.
Yeah, I'm a Massachusetts guy, so I love the East Coast comedy and stuff like that. And then. But he would have all these really interesting people on, and I knew him as a comedian. I kind of knew him, as he was into psychedelics and stuff like that. But when he did have people on, like Graham Hancock, and he had all these, first time I was exposed to Eddie Bravo and him getting, into conspiracies and stuff like that. And it was a lot of really interesting initial guests that I'm like, this is awesome. I've never thought about things like this, or I've never even heard of this guy. Or he had Dan Carlin on, which I had a long time ago too, and I got exposed to a lot of my guests from his show and I'm just like, I love the fact that this is a place where they're having casual conversations. It's as close to uncensored, no agenda type of conversation than you can get. And I wasn't getting that on the radio. I wasn't getting that on TV. I wasn't getting that anywhere else. And I'm like, this is fucking awesome. And I fell in love with it. And then similar to yourself, I felt like, okay, what am I doing? I pour concrete for a living. I'm like, what am I contributing in the world? I'm like, I'm not doing anything. I'm like, I felt so unfulfilled. I used to play music in a band with my brother and a couple of friends. We were in a metal band. And as I got older, lyrics initially were about relationships and stuff like that. And as I got older, it became much more political and much more about social things. But the band broke up. And I'm like, and then I went a couple years where I was just kind of depressed, and I wouldn't say that I was really depressed at a point where I couldn't enjoy anything, but I felt like something was missing in my life. And I felt like there's so doing the podcast was a great transition because I had microphones, I had software, and I, like yourself, I was just like, I got to do something. And I don't know what it's going to turn into, but I believe that, even if 5 people listen to my podcast, then I don't know who that one person is that's listening, but they could influence somebody else, and they could influence somebody else, and they could. And I always talk about how, like, some of the most influential people in history that we talk about, like Martin Luther King and whoever else, they were influenced by lesser known people. They probably, if we had Martin Luther King on this podcast right now and say, hey, who influenced you? What book changed the way you looked at the world, and it changed your perspectives and it had the biggest influence, or what even person in your life, they'd be people that we don't know and are probably for most likely didn't know. And those people, I'm sure, didn't think when they were writing that book or talking to a very young Martin Luther King that they were going to influence somebody who influenced the world. So you never know what impact you're having, and I think that's super important. I mean, who the fuck am I? I mean, I've had these guests on the show. Sometimes, I remember the first time I had Dan Carlin on, I was so fucking nervous. I still, like, till this day, I'm like, I got to get him back on because I sucked so bad when I had him on because I was so nervous. Because I'm like, who am I to talk to him? He has, like, one of the most downloaded shows in the podcast realm. And I'm like, and I'm just a Joe Schmo, just trying to.
You're the guy that got him on your show. That's who you are.
Yeah.
You're the guy that talked him into coming onto a show that he maybe hadn't heard before. And like you say, you never know where that's going to go. If somebody says, well, what is your plan? You don't have to have it figured out 10 years from now. You maybe your plan is just start doing it. Just start with step 1. Do what I want to do. I'll figure it out as we go on. Doors will open up as I move down this path. But if you start focusing on every single thing you have to do before you even start, I mean, it can be overwhelming and crippling. That's kind of how with me with the book, I didn't tell anyone I was writing it. I mean, I literally didn't tell even my wife. I wrote that thing in secret. And the reason why I did that was because I didn't know if I was going to finish it. I didn't know if I was going to actually do what needed to be done. In fact, looking back on it, if I had known how much work it was going to take, I probably wouldn't have started it because it became a bit overwhelming. But I just went with the attitude of, I'm going to see how this feels. And if it feels good, I'll keep doing it. And if it feels bad or if I lose interest on it, then no harm. I didn't tell everybody. Nobody's going, hey, man, how's that book coming? Oh, I never finished it. So I didn't want to be on the hook for that. So I just quietly set about doing it. And then the next thing you know, it was done. And then looking back on that, I felt very empowered. Like, okay, well, I can start something like this and finish it, see it all the way through, and then I can get out and talk about it, and then I can work on the next one. And then the motivation for me had always been just to justify writing another book, to sell enough copies, to get the word out there, in order to say to my family, I'm writing another book. I'm going to do it because I have. It's selling. People are out there talking about it. I'm on podcasts that did, I've been out there. I'm going to speak at an Acapulco and Dollar Vigilante Summit, which is fascinating and awesome for me because I get to geek out and, like I said, and just listen to all these other people talk about it, to hear, some of the world's experts on cryptocurrency and politics, and to hear Ron Paul and David Icke and all these people speaking. I'm flattered and honored to even be in the same room with them. But I also, like you said, those people inspired me to start. I wrote a book, written a second one now that's just about done. And I don't know who will read my book and will think about it the way I think about John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that woke me up and changed my life. I don't know if my book will do that to someone else. I hope it will. I think it will. And it might have already, but I don't, maybe I'll never know. And that's okay. At least I know that there's the possibility. It's out there. The information is out there. And for a lot of people, what I've said is that it's the book that you send to somebody in your family that is having a hard time with some of these topics, or maybe doesn't believe them or doesn't understand them. It's less of a book for us that are already having these discussions and understand what's going on. It's more of a book for the people that are on the fence or that think that you're nuts. You can say, listen, just read this stupid book. Just open it up, start anywhere, and just start reading it and see if something in there doesn't click for you. And so anyway, the response has been great. I've been humbled and overwhelmed, and really appreciative of that. And I'm appreciative of people like you having me on your podcast, because it's a big deal, man. It's your special place, it's your place where you get to invite people to talk about crazy shit with you, and I'm glad that you had me on, because I could honestly probably do this all day long. So
yeah, well, I think the cool thing is, like you were talking about how you got to meet so many different people in the community. I'm the same way. I've been very lucky to be able to meet so many cool people in the community. I mean, having Sam having me on, and then having all these people. I mean, James has been on my show a bunch of times. He has a huge following. I mean, and he's super busy, and he always takes time to come on the show, and we've kind of established a cool little friendship throughout the years. But to be able to talk to these people that I've watched their videos, and like you said, you were a fan of Greg's before you were on the show. Same thing with a lot of the guests that are on my show. I'm a fan of all these people before they come on the show. I've listened to interviews of yours before you came on the show. So it's like I'm familiar with these people, and to be able to actually connect with them and talk to them and realize that it's weird, because like they always say you don't want to meet your heroes, but it's funny because in our community, it's probably the only community where you can meet people you're a fan of, and for the most part, you're never really disappointed. Like they're almost cooler than you expected, and and nicer than expected. I remember the first time, when I had Jesse Ventura on, I was like super nervous, and he was supposed to be on for I think 20 to 30 minutes, and whoever I forget who I was dealing with that works for him, but they send me all these questions last second that they're like, oh, this is what Jesse wants to talk about, and I'm just like, have you not listened to my show? I'm like, what?
There's no script.
Yeah, there's no script, and I was super nervous because I'm like, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, what if I don't ask these questions and he expects them and then he's pissed and he never wants to come back on and whatever, and then I'm like, you know what? He might never come on again. I'm like, I might never be able to book him again. I'm like, why not take advantage of it? So I kind of just went with the motions, had a great conversation, ended up being on for I think about an hour, and he ended up being one of the nicest dudes I've ever had on, and it was just that's.
I'm glad to hear that. I would be super disappointed if I found out he was a real prick because I've always liked Jesse Ventura.
Yeah. Well, Roger Stone's also a super nice dude. I can't remember if it was the first or second time he was on the show where he was having some technical difficulties and he was waiting for his IT guy. So we were just kind of bullshitting until he figured out, because I think we were trying to get video. And he was all dressed up like usual in a suit, and he's like, I got the suit on. He's like, I need to get this video working. So then we're bullshitting, and I'm a big bourbon guy and whiskey guy, and so I'm like, hey, what does Nixon drink? And and like bullshitting about some of the celebrities and high ranked people that he hung out with and stuff like that. And super nice dude, like just so down to earth. But I do feel like sometimes Roger's very good at just like turning it on. Like he goes on, he knows the facts and points he wants to make and hit on. And but outside of that, and you see it a little bit in Get Me Roger, the documentary on Netflix. Outside of that, he's actually a really nice dude, and he gave me like a bunch of really nice compliments after he did the show the first time.
Cool.
And I'm like, and I like that because I'm a lot of people hate on Roger, and probably for I guess some probably legit reasons. He hasn't always been on the right side of history, but it was nice to see that, like, okay, there is this human behind all this. It's not just this very just all business. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm selling. This is this is my agenda. Let me stick to it. And I think most people who probably interacted with Roger will say the same thing. Even people that don't like what he's saying have said, like, Roger's a really nice dude, and so it's cool to meet these people and find out. And Ron Paul, I've never met Ron Paul. He's another guest that I would love to have on one day, and he's another guy that I'm a huge fan of. And
yeah, me too.
And want to check off of the bucket list. And he seems like another guy. If you sit down and talk to him, probably going to find out that he's one of the nicest people you ever meet. Which probably the opposite of many of these politicians. If you sat down and talked to him, you'd be like, this dude's fucking weird,
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, one of the speakers that'll be at Acapulco, who and someone that I quoted in my book on multiple occasions, is Dr. Cynthia McKinney, and she is a badass. I haven't met her, but from I watched the interviews and the what she did in Congress for her years there, and grilling Donald Rumsfeld about DynCorp, and she's that's who, if you've got daughters, that's who you should point them to and say, listen, this is who you want to be like. This lady went to jail in Israel for delivering school supplies to Palestinians, and they rammed her with their boats and imprisoned her for a week until the U.S. government was able to get her out. Like, this is somebody, this is somebody that you can look up to. This is somebody that is doing it right. And so I'm excited to hear these people speak in person, and and hopefully I won't come across like a groupie, wanting their own, try and play it as cool as possible. But I'm interested in hearing, I'm interested in hearing. I hear the mainstream media. We get enough of that. I'm interested in hearing different perspectives, and from somebody like Ron Paul, who had been there doing it for a long, long time, or Cynthia McKinney, who did, who was there for over a decade in Congress. I'm interested to hear how they say it works. I know how we're told it works, but I'm interested in the stories behind the scenes of how it actually goes down. And I think that if you can catch somebody, you get somebody on your podcast like that who in a not a guarded moment sort of spills the beans on how it really is. That's one of the things that I think is endearing about Jesse Ventura, is that he'll tell you what's going on. He'll tell you the truth, or as much of it as he's allowed to tell you. And I'm always interested in hearing that. And I never expect to hear that in the mainstream media. So I have to turn to podcasts and alternative and media and RT and organizations that have a little bit less restrictions placed on them. So I'm up for it. Who are you going to have? Who's your dream interview? You get one person on.
Yeah, it's funny because I've had so many Jesse Ventura was kind of one of my checklist ones, and after him, I've had quite a few people ask like, "Oh, who's your dream?" And I'm like, Ron Paul would definitely be one of them because I was a huge fan of his when he was running for president. Obviously, I think he got shanked pretty bad, and he actually has a ideology and beliefs that he actually believes in, and he's consistent with them. And I think that's something that I really admired was the fact that, like, okay, when I might not agree with everything he believes. I might not agree with every side of the debate, but at the end of the day, like, I know who he is and I know where he stands, and he's been in politics forever, and he's always been consistent. I respect his consistency too. That's one of those things where in politics you get so used to people flip flopping that when you find somebody that says what they think. And consistently says it over their entire career, that even if you don't agree with it, it's nice that you have somebody that's like, this is who I am, this is what I believe, that's not going to change, or at least it's not going to change easily. I've always liked that about him, and I agree with the majority of the things that he says, but what bothers me the most is that when I hear Ron Paul speak, I get so frustrated that I don't hear more of that. I want more of that from all these politicians. I said, like, if one guy can do it, can't the rest of you do it too? So it's like, I feel like I want to give him so much credit and compliment him so much. And then I go, I shouldn't have to compliment or credit any of these people. This is how you should behave. You should behave like that all the time. You should be telling the truth about these things. You should talk about what's really important. You shouldn't fall into these soundbite clips that they're told. You got to say this, you got to say that, repeat this, repeat that over and over again. I like it. When I hear Ron Paul, I just think everyone should have that mentality, that philosophy of like, I'm just going to tell you what I think, and this is it. But at the end, it's a bit of a letdown because I realize that he's the only person doing that, and then it makes me feel kind of bummed out. I'm like, God damn it! What's it going to take to get everybody to kind of come to the, stick a microphone in front of their face and say, hey, let me ask you about our foreign policy. What do you think? I think it sucks. And you're like, holy shit, you actually said it. I was never I can't wait till we get to the point where that is like common. That is like how everyone is. They say what they think, but that might be a long way away. Yeah, I think it's a rigged game, and most of them won't say that because the same people the military industrial complex that's funding their elections and their campaigns are going to tell them not to say it. So that's a huge issue. Yeah, I think Ron Paul, Abby Martin are probably two people. I was a huge fan of Breaking the Step back in the day. I used to watch it. Yeah, me too. Every morning before I went to work, I'd put it on while I was getting ready. And I've had her brother on a bunch of times, Robbie, but I haven't got her on yet. And then Joe Rogan, of course, because he was the reason I started this podcast, and I think he's a huge influence on a lot of people. And I think he gets a little bit of shit for kind of backtracking on some conspiracies, and I've heard a couple theories from people close to him on why they think that is. If it's because the show's gotten so big or whatnot, but I think he even if he just scratches the surface of some of these conspiracies and gets somebody who's just an MMA fan or a comedy fan to kind of look into it a little bit, then that alone I think is helping. We're just kind of opening people's minds and looking at things from different perspectives. Yeah, I'm with you. We have the same. I bet our YouTube history is similar. Yeah, probably. We're definitely going to the same FEMA camp for sure. At least we know we'll have somebody to talk to. As we're turning big rocks into small rocks with campers all day long. So let my listeners know where they can get your book, and then also to tell them about the new book that I think will be coming out hopefully sometime soon. Yeah. So my book, you can get it. I just finished building my website, which is like a year or two late, but anyway, it should be operational by the time this video hits the air in the next day or two. The Octopus of Global Control.com. You can buy it there. There are links to where it's available for sale on Amazon and also on Barnes & Noble, but you can get it there. You can get the digital version from me as well. You can check that out. And I've been Jeff Berwick, the dollar vigilante and the founder of Anarchapulco.
and also a podcast called The Anarchast. He wrote a book. I've stepped in and helped him out with some of that. We're hoping to have it launched by the time Anarchapulco starts, which is the middle of February. So like a month from now, 2019, it'll be the 6th year of that. So it's not available yet, but I'll have information about it on my website for sure. People can get it. Like I said, yeah, if you want to get the book and send it to your mom or your brother-in-law or somebody who thinks you're out of your mind for talking about all these things, it could be helpful. It could break the ice, and at the very least, you won't have to be the bad guy to bringing it up again anymore. So
yeah, and I'll tell my listeners to check out his Charles his interview on the Tinfoil Hat podcast. Versitas TV. I know that's on. I found that on YouTube, but and also on THC on Greg Harwood's show.
Yeah, that's fun. God, it was so good. But with the Sam Tripoli thing, it's funny. After we got done, it was like we described it as two guys yelling at each other in agreement. Which is basically what it was. So
well, this stuff it works you. It does get you worked up. I mean, I've done shows on. I remember. Well, which one? There's one that I did two on pedophilia. One on the A Open Secret. You know, which is that documentary, and then I did one on the Franklin scandal. And me having kids, this stuff just fucking works me up, and I could find myself like getting worked up talking about it. And it just bothers the shit out of you. But it's also motivation to do this work. And I'm sure, you're a family man. I'm sure that, the world that they're going to one day, take from us, that we're going to hand over to them, you want it to be a little better than what, than the way we got it. And if you can do anything to help improve it, then, why not? So that's I'm sure it's a motivation.
It is. And if you have the ability to see through the bullshit, you become obligated to disclose it, to talk about it and discuss it and point out to the people that don't see through it, or at least, don't see through it at this moment. I felt like it was kind of an obligation to try and do my part to wake people up. Like you said, you got to, I sometimes just shake my head and think like, do these maniacs that are running the world, they have to live on the same planet too, unless there's something we don't know about another planet elsewhere. But like the things that they're doing to the world, like how can they justify it knowing that they have to live here as well? And so I don't know. I guess that's more of a in-depth look into the mind of a psychopath. But
that's exactly it. I think that's exactly it. They're psychopaths. They're not, and I think politicians, they're no different. Their way of thinking is no different than a CEO of a big corporation. They're looking at, how do I gain more power? How do I make quarterly gains? How do I get more money? And it doesn't matter if it means using some chemical that's going to harm people, and eventually, they're going to get sued or whatnot. It's like, well, let's just do it and see how much profit we can make from it before people find out that's killing them, or and it's all about, so they don't look at the big picture like you and I. They don't look at like, okay, what's the long-term effects of this? I mean, these are public companies. They care about quarters. They care about keeping the stockholders happy. And I think that's a huge issue, because, when basically your mentality revolves around whatever it takes at whatever cost to make more money and keep growing, then you'll do whatever it takes, and you don't look at what long-term effects it could have. So and also they've had their negative behavior has been positively reinforced by the fact that they don't ever go to prison, or they have a higher stock price, or they're living in a $10 million house, and they're seeing all these things going, I must be doing something right, because I don't feel any of the ramifications of this, or the repercussions from my actions. And that's of course because we're living in a very sick world where people like that benefit, where everybody else who lives next to some farm that's getting sprayed, constantly with glyphosate is, growing a third arm out of their back. That becomes their problem, and not the CEO of Monsanto's problem, as he's, going to the south of France in his yacht. He doesn't give a fuck about you. And that's part of the reason why he's the CEO, because he, in their mind, it's, we have to, they're working towards the stock price, and that is the ends justify the means sort of philosophy towards that. And of course that has
horrible, is a horrible impact on the world. But as far as, like you said, if you're psychopathic, they're looking at short-term benefits and not giving a damn about the long-term impacts of it. And that is something that has to change.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that I tend to believe that most people who are multimillionaires probably are not the most moral of people. Like, you couldn't make a honest million without screwing somebody back. I mean, that's kind of the system that we've created, where it benefits people who put money over morals and are willing to do shicey things. And I mean, we have a small construction company, and we deal with bigger contractors. And they're all the most successful ones are successful because they're shameless. I mean, it's because they're willing to do whatever it takes, and I'm not. So it's like, to me, it's like, well, yeah, we're never going to be that huge construction company because I'm not willing to do those things. I'm not willing to pretend that I'm not, being a shithead by busting your balls about this and saying I'm not going to pay you for this because that wasn't done correctly. When I know that, okay, that's acceptable, but I just don't want to pay you, and I'm going to make a little extra money.
Right.
Which Trump, I mean, Trump, when he was in New York, he put a lot of contractors out of business doing that type of stuff. So it's it's not that's the reason why you and I are doing this, and we're not CEOs of big companies, which I'm completely content with, because I'd rather, I have to be able to look in the mirror and be happy with who I am and what I've done in whatever time frame I have on this planet.
I feel the same way. Yeah, it's not worth it to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks a lot, Charles. I really appreciate your time. It was an awesome conversation. Hopefully have you on again in the near future. And keep up the great work. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. You too.
Hey, take care.
Bye.
Believe in the ripple effect.